A year after she left me bankrupt and broken for a rich finance guy, my ex-wife suddenly texted me. Her message read, "We need to talk, urgently. Lives depend on it." She thought I was still the same loser she walked out on. She had no idea I was currently reading her text while sitting in a 5-star steakhouse, holding hands with the one person she hated most in this world, her own sister. And my reply? It didn't just end the conversation. It started a war. Welcome back to Inspiration Seeker. If you believe that karma always finds an address and that the best revenge is massive success, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video. Also, tell me in the comments, would you ever date your ex's sibling if they were the complete opposite of your ex? Let's dive into the story. The vibration of my phone against the mahogany table was the only thing disturbing the perfect evening. I was sitting at the Prime Cut, one of the most exclusive steakhouses in downtown Chicago. Outside, the winter wind was howling against the glass, burying the city in snow. But inside, it was warm, smelling of aged ribeye, expensive cologne, and old money. I ignored the phone at first. I was too busy admiring the way the candlelight danced in the eyes of the woman sitting across from me. She was laughing at a terrible joke I had just made, a genuine, soft laugh that didn't feel forced. For the first time in years, my chest didn't feel tight with anxiety. I felt like a man who had finally made it back to shore after drowning for a decade. But the phone buzzed again. And again, it was a persistent, angry vibration that demanded attention. With a sigh, I picked it up, expecting it to be a server alert from my company or maybe a late-night email from a client. I froze. The name on the screen was one I hadn't seen in exactly 365 days. Vanessa, my ex-wife, the woman who had looked me in the eye while I was sobbing over our foreclosed house and told me I wasn't man enough to keep her happy. The woman who had packed her designer bags and hopped into a Porsche with a guy named Brad while I was left figuring out how to afford ramen noodles. I unlocked the screen, my thumb hovering over the message. It was short, desperate, and completely out of character for the ice queen I used to be married to. "Mark, please answer. We need to talk, urgently. Lives depend on it." I stared at the words. A year of radio silence. And she breaks it with melodrama. "Lives depend on it." It sounded like a line from one of those soap operas she used to watch. A part of me wanted to laugh. Another part of me felt a cold spike of anger. The audacity to demand my time after she threw me away like garbage was breathtaking. I looked up from the glowing screen to the woman, holding my hand across the table. Chloe, Vanessa's younger sister. The ugly duckling of the family, as Vanessa used to call her. But tonight, Chloe looked nothing like a duckling. She was radiant, kind, and everything her sister pretended to be, but never was. If Vanessa knew who I was with right now, urgent wouldn't even begin to cover it. I took a deep breath, realizing that the universe had a very twisted sense of humor, and tonight I was finally holding the punchline. I stared at the blinking cursor, weighing my options. The old Mark, the one who was desperate to save his failing marriage, the one who apologized when he hadn't done anything wrong, would have panicked. That Mark would have rushed out of the restaurant, terrified that Vanessa was in some kind of actual danger. But that man died the day she walked out on me. The man sitting here tonight knew Vanessa's playbook better than anyone. Urgent usually meant she needed money, or her vanity was bruised, or she simply couldn't stand the thought of me existing peacefully without her. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to jump. I decided to give her the truth, but I knew the truth would hurt more than any insult I could conjure up. I didn't want to play games, but I also wasn't going to hide my reality to protect her feelings. My thumbs moved across the screen, deliberate and steady. I typed, "Not a good time. I'm on a date with your sister. We're celebrating." I didn't add an emoji. I didn't add an explanation. I just hit send. The reaction was instantaneous. Not even 3 seconds later, the phone lit up with a call. Her name flashed on the screen again, vibrating violently against the white tablecloth. It was almost comical how predictable she was. She didn't care about the emergency enough to call first, but the moment her ego was threatened, she was blowing up my line. I didn't answer. I didn't even reject the call to voicemail. I simply pressed the power button silencing the ringer, and flipped the phone face down on the table. The black case looked like a tombstone for our past. "Is everything okay?" Chloe asked, her voice laced with that genuine concern that still caught me off guard. She had paused halfway through cutting her steak, her blue eyes searching mine. She didn't know it was Vanessa. She just saw my jaw tighten and the mood shift. I reached across and squeezed her hand, forcing a smile that quickly became real as I looked at her. "Everything is perfect," I said, and I meant it. "Just a spam caller. You know how they are. Relentless." "Well, ignore them," Chloe grinned, relaxing back into her chair. "You promised me a night without business talk, and I intend to keep it," I replied, signaling the waiter for another bottle of wine. I focused back on Chloe, pushing the phone out of my mind. I enjoyed the rest of the evening, blissfully unaware that my single text message hadn't just annoyed my ex-wife. It had triggered a chain reaction that was going to blow our entire world apart by sunrise. I thought I was just brushing her off. I didn't realize I had just lit the fuse on a bomb that had been ticking for over a year. To truly understand why ignoring that call felt like such a victory, you have to rewind 14 months. You have to see the man I was before the suits and the success. Back then, I was drowning. My tech startup was bleeding cash. I was 3 months behind on the mortgage, and the stress was eating me alive. But I was still trying. I was still fighting for us. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I remember the weather, gray and drizzling, typical Chicago gloom. I had just closed a tiny consulting deal, nothing massive, but enough to keep the lights on for another month. I was ecstatic. I stopped at a grocery store and bought a bouquet of cheap tulips, Vanessa's favorite, or at least the only ones we could afford. I wanted to surprise her. I wanted to show her that things were turning around. I unlocked the front door quietly, grinning like an idiot with those plastic-wrapped flowers in my hand. The house was silent, which was odd for mid-afternoon. I walked up the stairs, my heart feeling lighter than it had in months. I walked into our bedroom, ready to shout surprise. Then I stopped. On my nightstand, right next to the photo of us from our wedding day, sat a watch. It wasn't my watch. It was a heavy gold Rolex Submariner, the kind that cost more than my car. Beside it lay a pair of keys to a Porsche. My stomach dropped so hard I nearly vomited. Then I heard it. From the master bathroom came the sound of the shower running, and over the noise of the water, Vanessa was singing. She wasn't just humming. She was belting out a pop song, cheerful and vibrant. It was a specific tone she only used when she was genuinely, deeply happy, a tone I hadn't heard directed at me in 2 years. I stood there, frozen, the cheap tulips wilting in my grip. The bathroom door opened. Vanessa stepped out, wrapped in a towel, steam billowing around her. When she saw me, she didn't scream. She didn't try to hide. She didn't even look guilty. She looked annoyed. "You're home early," she said flatly, glancing at the flowers and then at the Rolex on the table. She didn't scramble to cover up. She just sighed, as if I were the inconvenience. "Well, since you're here, we might as well do this now. Brad is picking me up in an hour. He left his watch, and he's coming back for it. And for me, Brad..." I choked out, my voice barely a whisper. "Who is Brad?" "A man who doesn't have account coupons to buy me dinner," she sneered, walking past me to the closet. "I'm done waiting for your ship to come in, Mark. It sank, and I'm not drowning with you. People say that rock bottom is a solid foundation to build on, but when you hit it, it doesn't feel like a foundation. It feels like a grave." The months following that afternoon were a blur of humiliations. You might think that because she cheated, the court would have some sympathy for me. You'd be wrong. In a no-fault divorce state, infidelity is just a detail, not a verdict. Since my business was technically an asset, even though it was failing, Vanessa's lawyers argued it had future potential value. To keep the rights to my own software, I had to give up almost everything else. She took the car. She took the savings. But the thing that broke me wasn't the money. She took Barnaby, my golden retriever. She didn't even like dogs. She just knew that taking him would hurt me more than any financial figure ever could. I moved into a 400-square-foot studio apartment in a rough part of the city. The heating barely worked, and the walls were so thin I could hear my neighbor coughing all night. My diet consisted of instant ramen and tap water. I was a 30-year-old man with a master's degree, sleeping on a mattress on the floor, wondering where it all went wrong. The worst part was a digital window into her new life. I knew I shouldn't have looked, but I couldn't help it. I'd scroll through Instagram at 2 a.m., shivering under a thin blanket, watching Vanessa and Brad living the high life. There were photos of them skiing in Aspen, drinking champagne in the Hamptons, and driving that Porsche she had taunted me with. She looked vibrant, wealthy, and completely unbothered by the wreckage she left behind. I felt worthless. I felt like a ghost in my own life. But despair eventually turns into something else if you let it sit long enough. It turns into fuel. One night, catching a glimpse of my gaunt reflection in the bathroom mirror, eyes dark, stubble grown out, looking like a defeated victim, something snapped. I realized I had two choices. I could let Vanessa be the end of my story, or I could make her the villain in my origin story. I washed my face with cold water. I shaved. I sat down at my cheap, wobbling desk and opened my laptop. I decided right then and there to kill an old Mark. The Mark who begged for love was dead. The Mark who was afraid of risk was dead. For the next 6 months, I didn't date, I didn't party, and I didn't sleep more than 4 hours a night. I poured every ounce of my pain into my code. I wasn't working to get rich anymore. I was working to survive. 6 months into my self-imposed exile, I finally ventured out of my cave. My internet had been spotty, so I dragged my battered laptop to a small, independent coffee shop a few blocks away to upload a massive update for my software. I looked like hell, wearing a faded hoodie and running on caffeine fumes. Try and make myself invisible in the corner booth. That's when I saw her. At first, I didn't recognize the woman standing in line. She was wearing a simple oversized sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked tired, carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. But when she turned to grab her drink, I saw the eyes. They were the same shade of blue as Vanessa's, but without the cold, predatory glint. It was Chloe, Vanessa's younger sister. My instinct was to run. The last thing I needed was another member of that family mocking my downfall. I started packing my bag, hoping to slip out the back, but I knocked my empty mug off the table. It shattered loudly against the floor. Every head in the shop turned, including hers. Our eyes locked. I froze, bracing for the smirk or the pity. But Chloe didn't smirk. Her eyes widened, and then, to my complete shock, she offered a tentative, warm smile. She walked right over, ignoring the barista calling out the next order. "Mark," she asked softly, "is that you?" "Chloe." I grunted, kneeling to pick up the ceramic shards. "If you're here to report back to your sister on how pathetic I look, take a picture. It lasts longer." She knelt down beside me, helping me pick up the pieces. "I don't talk to Vanessa," she said quietly. "Not since she missed Mom's funeral to go to Cabo with that guy." I stopped, a shard of glass in my hand. I had forgotten. Their mother had been sick for years. Vanessa always complained about the burden, but Chloe was the one who actually did the work. The doctor visits, the late nights, the hospice care. Chloe was the plain sister, the background character, the one who stayed home while Vanessa chased the spotlight. "I'm sorry, Mark," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "For everything. For what she did to you. You didn't deserve that. You were the only real family I had for a long time." We stood up. I went to the counter to pay for the broken mug, but the barista shook his head. "Lady already covered it. And your refill." I looked back at her. It was a $5 coffee and a $2 mug. But in that moment, it felt like $1 million charity. It was the first act of kindness anyone had shown me since my life imploded. I realized then that while I had lost a wife, Chloe had lost a sister long before the divorce papers were ever signed. We were both casualties of the same war. And standing there in that coffee shop, I didn't see an enemy anymore. I saw the only other person who understood the scars I was carrying. That cup of coffee with Chloe didn't just wake me up, it grounded me. I went back to my apartment with a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't working out of spite anymore. I was working toward a future. My software, which I named Sentinel, was designed to help small businesses protect themselves from the kind of financial data breaches that destroy livelihoods. I knew the pain of losing everything, and I poured that understanding into the code. It wasn't just a product. It was a shield, and the market responded. 3 months after that meeting in the coffee shop, a major cybersecurity firm from Silicon Valley reached out. They didn't want to buy a subscription. They wanted to buy the whole company. I remember staring at the DocuSign contract on my laptop screen. The number at the bottom of the page had 2 commas in it. In the span of a signature, I went from eating ramen to having a net worth that would make Brad's finance salary look like pocket change. But here's the thing about real poverty. It changes you. When the wire transfer hit, I didn't run out and buy a Ferrari. I didn't post a stack of cash on Instagram. I bought a nice, tailored suit. I paid off my parents' mortgage, and I reinvested the rest into a new consulting firm. While my bank account was growing, so was my connection with Chloe. We started a ritual. Every Tuesday night, we'd meet for dinner, not at fancy steakhouses, but at hole-in-the-wall type places or burger joints. Places Vanessa wouldn't be caught dead in. We talked for hours. We dissected the wreckage of the past, yes, but mostly we talk about the future. I learned that Chloe was brilliant. She had an eye for interior design that was stifled because Vanessa had always criticized her taste as boring. I learned she was funny, dry, witty, and observant. For the first time, I wasn't provider or the failure. I was just Mark, and she was just Chloe. There was no romance yet, just a profound, healing friendship. But looking back, I realized that those Tuesday nights were the bricks we were using to build something far more stable than the house of cards I had shared with her sister. I was building an empire of wealth, yes, but with Chloe, I was building a sanctuary. And I didn't know it yet, but I was about to fall harder than I ever thought possible. It wasn't a candlelit dinner or a grand gesture that changed everything between us. It was a breakdown on the side of I-90 in the middle of a blizzard. Chicago winters are unforgiving, and one Tuesday night, Chloe didn't show up to our usual spot. She called me, her voice shaking, barely audible over the wind. Her old sedan had died on the highway. Her heater was busted, and the tow truck was 2 hours out. I didn't think, I just moved. I drove my new SUV through the snowdrifts, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, terrified that she was freezing out there alone. When I finally saw her hazard lights flashing in the darkness, relief washed over me like a physical wave. I pulled up, jumped out, and ushered her into my passenger seat. She was shivering uncontrollably, her teeth chattering, her hands like ice. I blasted the heat and wrapped my heavy coat around her, rubbing her arms to get the circulation back. We sat there for a while, the engine humming, the world outside reduced to a blur of white snow. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a quiet, heavy intimacy. The cabin felt small, safe, and removed from reality. "You didn't have to come," she whispered, looking at me from beneath the hood of my coat. "You have important things to do. You're a CEO now, Mark." I looked at her, really looked at her. Her nose was red from the cold, no makeup, hair a mess, and she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "There is nothing more important than you, Chloe. Don't you get that by now?" The air shifted. It became thick with unspoken words. She stared at me, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't understand," she said softly. "Vanessa treated you like dirt. Our family treated you like an ATM. Why are you so good to me?" "Because you're not them," I said, "and because you were the only one who saw me when I had nothing." She reached out and touched my face, her hand still cold but her touch electric. "I always envied her, you know," she confessed. "Not for the money, but because she had someone who looked at her the way you're looking at me right now. She never deserved it." I didn't let her finish. I leaned in, closing the gap. When our lips touched, it wasn't tentative. It was an answer to a question we had both been asking for months. In that kiss, the ghost of Vanessa finally vanished. I realized I wasn't using Chloe to get back at my ex. I wasn't trying to replace what I had lost. I was discovering that I had been married to the wrong sister all along. Chloe wasn't a consolation prize. She was a jackpot. Let's snap back to the present. The romantic glow of the steakhouse and the snowy flashbacks were yesterday. Today was the morning after, and reality has a nasty habit of hitting hard. When the sun comes up, I woke up in my penthouse apartment. The city of Chicago sprawling out beneath my floor-to-ceiling windows like a jagged map of steel and glass. Chloe was still asleep, her breathing soft and rhythmic, safe in the life we had built together. I slipped out of bed, grabbed a cup of coffee, and finally decided to face the digital music. I retrieved my phone from the kitchen counter where I had left it the night before and held down the power button. As soon as the screen flared to life, the device nearly shook out of my hand. It didn't just buzz, it convulsed. A torrent of notifications cascaded down the screen in a frantic blur. 53 missed calls, 22 voicemails, over 100 text messages, all from Vanessa. The texts had devolved from demanding to pleading and finally to something that looked like incoherent panic. Mark, pick up. He locked me out. They're taking everything. I have nowhere to go. Please. I frowned, taking a sip of the black coffee. They? Who was they? I walked into the living room and tapped the remote to turn on the wall-mounted television, flipping to the local news channel. I didn't even have to wait for the headline. It was right there, breaking news, emblazoned in bold red letters across the bottom of the screen. Finance mogul Bradford Sterling arrested in $50 million Ponzi scheme. And there he was, Brad, the man who had saved Vanessa from a life of mediocrity with me. He was being shoved into back of a federal police cruiser, his suit jacket pulled over his head to hide his face, handcuffs glinting in the camera flashes. The anchor was speaking rapidly. Federal agents raided the Sterling penthouse at dawn, seizing assets, luxury vehicles, and freezing all associate accounts. Sterling is accused of defrauding investors across 3 states. I stood there, the coffee mug warm in my hand, watching the man who ruined my marriage get destroyed by his own greed. Suddenly, Vanessa's urgent text from last night made perfect sense. She hadn't reached out because she missed me. She reached out because the ship she jumped onto was sinking, and she was looking for a lifeboat. But she had burned the only lifeboat she had. I didn't even get the chance to finish watching the report. The sound of the news anchor's voice was drowned out by a violent, frantic pounding on my front door. It wasn't a knock. It was an assault on the wood. Someone was hammering with their fists, desperate to get in. I set my coffee mug down on the granite island, the noise echoing through the high ceilings of the penthouse. I knew exactly who it was. The doorman downstairs was usually strict, but Vanessa still had that way of crying on command that could manipulate even the toughest security guard. She had likely spun some sob story about an emergency to bypass the lobby desk. I walked to the door, taking my time. The pounding didn't stop. Mark, open up. I know you're in there. I unlocked the deadbolt and swung the heavy door open. The woman standing in my hallway was barely recognizable as the Vanessa I had married. The Vanessa I knew spent 2 hours on her hair every morning and wouldn't be caught dead without designer sunglasses. This woman was a wreck. Her hair was matted and wet from the snow. Her mascara was smeared in dark streaks down her cheeks, and she was shivering uncontrollably in a thin cashmere sweater. No coat, no purse, just panic. She didn't wait for an invitation. She shoved past me, stumbling into the warmth of my entryway like a wild animal escaping a storm. "You have to help me," she gasped, her voice hoarse. She began pacing in circles on my hardwood floor, hugging herself. They took it all, Mark. The FBI, the SEC, they were everywhere. They seized the penthouse. They towed the Porsche. Brad locked me out of the safe before they dragged him away. I have nothing. My cards are declined. They even took my phone as evidence. She finally stopped pacing and looked at me, her eyes wide and manic. "You need to give me cash. I need a lawyer and I need a hotel room. A nice one. I can't be seen like this." I stood there, leaning against the doorframe, crossing my arms. I watched her rattle off demands as if I were still her husband, as if she hadn't destroyed my life a year ago. She hadn't even said hello. She hadn't asked how I was. She just assumed that because I was Mark, I would fix it. "Vanessa," I said, my voice calm and low, "what makes you think this is my problem?" She blinked, genuinely confused by my question. Because we were married, Mark. Because you owe me. I gave you the best years of my life. The delusion was staggering. But before I could answer, her eyes darted past me, scanning the living room, and landed on something draped over the back of my leather sofa. A beige trench coat. A woman's coat. Her face twisted, the panic instantly replaced by that familiar, toxic jealousy. "Who is here?" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Don't tell me you actually have a woman in here while I'm going through hell." Vanessa stormed over the couch and snatched up the coat. It was a sensible, high-quality wool coat, elegant, but definitely not the four-figure European designer label she used to demand I buy her. She held it up like it was a dirty rag, her lip curling in disgust as she inspected the fabric. "Who is she, Mark?" she spat out, tossing the coat back onto the cushions with disdain. "Some desperate waitress you picked up to feel like a big man again? Someone cheap enough to match your new lifestyle?" Then a flicker of memory seemed to cross her face. My text message from the night before. Her eyes narrowed, sharpening into slits as the realization hit her. "Wait, you said you were with her. You were bluffing. You had to be bluffing." She let out a sharp, incredulous laugh that echoed painfully in the quiet apartment. "You're actually sleeping with Chloe? My frumpy, boring little sister? Seriously, Mark? That is pathetic even for you. What? Are you trying to build a collection of my rejects?" The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. I felt a surge of protectiveness rise in my chest, hot and immediate. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, my patience finally snapping. "Watch your mouth," I said, my voice low but dangerous. "Oh, please," she scoffed, waving a hand dismissively, completely misreading the situation. "She's a charity case, Mark. She always has been. I bet she's loving this. Finally getting my leftovers. Does she know you're only using her to get back at me? It's embarrassing." I looked at this woman, this bitter, superficial stranger, and felt nothing but pity. She truly believed the world revolved around her. "You still don't get it," I said, walking past her pick up Chloe's coat, gently smoothing out the wrinkles Vanessa had made. "I'm not using her, and she is not your leftover." I turned to face her, delivering the blow that I knew would shatter her ego. "I'm sleeping with my fiancée, Vanessa, and unlike you, she didn't need to see my bank statement to decide I was worth loving." Vanessa froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The word fiancé hung in the air between us like a guillotine blade. She had come here expecting a broken man she could manipulate, but she had just run headfirst into a wall of reality, and the wall was about to talk back. For a second, silence reigned. Then Vanessa threw her head back and laughed. It was a harsh, brittle sound that grated against the walls of my apartment. "Fiancé!" she wheezed, wiping a tear of hysteria from her eye. "Oh, Mark, you really are desperate. You're going to marry Chloe? Do you realize what a burden she is? She's broke. She works at a library. For God's sake. She has nothing to offer you but debt and bad fashion sense." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Try to drag me back into her toxic orbit. Look, I get it. You're hurt. But let's be real. Mom left the entire estate to me. The house, the stocks, the trust fund. It's all in my name. Once this legal mess with Brad blows over, I'll be back on top. Chloe got nothing. Mom knew she couldn't handle money. So if you think you're marrying into the family fortune by picking the spare heir, you're in for a rude awakening." She looked triumphant. Even in her lowest moment, she found comfort in the idea that she was still the golden child, the chosen one. "Actually, that's not quite right, Vanessa." The voice came from the hallway, soft, steady, and commanding. We both turned. Chloe was standing there, leaning against the archway leading to the bedroom. She wasn't wearing pajamas. She was dressed in slacks and a blouse, looking immaculate and composed, a stark contrast to the disheveled mess shivering in my living room. In her hand, she held a thick manila envelope. Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Oh, great. The mouth speaks. Go back to bed, Chloe. The adults are talking." Chloe didn't flinch. She walked into the room, her step silent on the hardwood. She stopped right in front of her sister, holding out the envelope. "You never did go to the reading of the will, did you?" Chloe asked, her voice devoid of malice, which somehow made it cut deeper. "You were too busy posting photos from a yacht in the Mediterranean to show up for the legal proceedings." "I have a lawyer for that," Vanessa snapped, though her eyes darted nervously to the envelope. "I know it was in the will. Mom told me years ago. Everything is mine." "Mom did tell you that," Chloe agreed. "Years ago, before she got sick. Before she spent 6 months in hospice dying of cancer, while you were partying in Cabo with Brad." Chloe dropped the envelope onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. "She changed it, Vanessa. The week before she died. She wrote you out completely." Vanessa looked at the envelope on the table as if it were a bomb. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking even more ghost-like than before. She reached out with a trembling hand, snatched the documents, and began frantically flipping through the pages. This isn't possible," she stammered, her eyes darting across the legal jargon. "Mom wouldn't do this. She loved me. I was her favorite. She loved the idea of you, Vanessa," Chloe said, her voice steady and calm, anchoring the room while her sister spun out of control. But toward the end, she saw the reality. You didn't answer her calls. You didn't visit when the chemo stopped working. You were too busy living your best life to hold her hand while she took her last breath. Chloe took a step closer, her posture strong, shedding every ounce of the timid girl she used to be. "Do you remember where you were the day she passed? You were at a vineyard in Napa. You posted a story on Instagram holding a glass of Pinot, caption, 'Cheers to New Beginnings.' Mom saw that. Vanessa, I was holding the phone for her. She saw that while she was dying, you were toasting to your freedom." Vanessa froze. The papers crinkled in her grip. "That night," Chloe continued, "she called a lawyer. She liquidated the trust intended for you and moved the entire estate, the house, the portfolio, the life insurance, into my name. She said she didn't want her legacy funding the lifestyle of a daughter who couldn't be bothered to say goodbye." I watched Vanessa's knees actually buckle. She slumped onto the edge of the armchair, the reality crashing down on her with the force of a freight train. She had spent the last year bragging about a fortune that wasn't hers. She had ignored the probate notices, assuming they were just formalities, too arrogant to realize they were actually eviction notices. "So, you see," I added, stepping up beside Chloe and placing a hand on her shoulder, "Chloe isn't the broke one. You are. The penthouse is federal property. Your bank accounts are frozen. And the family money you were banking on, it belongs to the woman standing right in front of you. You're not just homeless, Vanessa. You're disinherited." For the first time in her life, Vanessa was completely silent. The room was heavy with the suffocating weight of consequences. She had lost a husband who loved her, the lover who funded her, and the mother who raised her, all because she loved herself too much to care about anyone else. The silence didn't last long. It was broken by a sound I never thought I'd hear from Vanessa, a sob of pure, unfiltered terror. The defiance evaporated. The arrogance melted away like slush on the sidewalk. In an instant, she wasn't the high society socialite anymore. She was just a scared, desperate woman who realized she had backed herself into a corner with no exit. She slid off the armchair and dropped to her knees. "Mark," her voice cracked, trembling. She reached out, her fingers grasping for the hem of my pants, desperate for any kind of anchor. "Mark, please. You can't let this happen to me. You know me. I'm not cut out for this. I can't live on the street." She looked up at me, mascara streaming down her face, trying to summon the look that used to work on me. The widening eyes, the quivering lip. "We were married for 5 years. Doesn't that mean anything? We had good times, didn't we? Remember our honeymoon in Maui? Remember the Christmas we got the puppy? It was sickening. She was weaponizing our memories. Try to dig up the corpse of a marriage she had murdered just to save her own skin. I was confused," she cried, tightening her grip on my leg. "Brad, he manipulated me. He promised me the world, Mark. He told me you were holding me back. I was brainwashed, but I see it now. I see how strong you are. You're the one I should have bet on. We can fix this. I can sign a post-nup. I'll do anything. Just please don't kick me out. She was completely ignoring Chloe now, focusing her laser beam desperation entirely on me. She truly believed that my self-worth was still so low that I would take her back just because she was finally asking. I looked down at her, and then I looked at Chloe. Chloe wasn't angry. She wasn't gloating. She was just standing there, looking at her sister with a profound, heartbreaking sadness. There was no triumph in her eyes, only pity. In that contrast, the choice was clearer than ever. On the floor was a woman who only loved me when she needed me. Standing beside me was a woman who loved me when I had nothing to give. I felt a cold detachment settle over me. The spell was broken. The goddess I used to worship was just a beggar in a stolen coat. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. I simply reached down and peeled her fingers off my pant leg, one by one, with the same detached precision I would use to remove a burr from my jacket. I took 2 steps back, putting a definitive physical distance between us. Vanessa stayed on the floor, looking up at me, her face a mask of smeared makeup and disbelief. She was waiting for me to cave. She was waiting for the old Mark to offer her a guest room, a check, or even just a glass of water. Instead, I walked over to the front door and pulled it open. The cold draft from the hallway rushed in, cutting through the warmth of the apartment. "Get up, Vanessa," I said. My voice was flat. "And get out." She scrambled to her feet, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Mark, you can't be serious. Where am I supposed to go? It's snowing. I have no car, no money." "You have legs," I interrupted. "And you have a survival instinct that's sharper than anyone I know. You'll figure it out. Just like I had to figure out when you left me in an empty house with a pile of bills." She took a step toward me, opening her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. "You sent me a text yesterday saying we needed to talk urgently. Well, this is the talk. You want a life of luxury with a man who could buy you the world. You got exactly what you asked for. You just didn't read the fine print." I pointed into the hallway. "You made your choice, Vanessa. You bet on the flash, and you lost the substance. I am not your backup plan. I am not your safety net. And I am certainly not your husband anymore." She looked at Chloe one last time, her eyes narrowing with a flash of that old hatred. But before she could speak, I stepped in front of her, blocking her view. "And one more thing," I said, my voice dropping to a low growl. "If you ever try to contact Chloe again, if you try to guilt her, manipulate her, or ask her for a single cent of the inheritance she deserves, my lawyers will make the feds look like a welcoming committee. Do you understand?" Vanessa stared at me. She saw the steel in my eyes. She realized finally that the door was closed in more ways than one. She let out a choked sob, pulled a thin cardigan tighter around her trembling body, and walked out into the cold, gray hallway. I didn't watch her walk to the elevator. I firmly closed the door, the heavy click of the lock sounding like the final period at the end of a long, painful sentence. The click of the deadbolt echoed through the apartment like a gunshot, signaling the end of the war. For a moment, the only sound was the wind howling outside the glass. I turned around. Chloe was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, tears silently tracking down her cheeks. She wasn't crying for the loss of the money or the drama or even the insults. She was crying because she was finally mourning the sister she wished she had, accepting that the real Vanessa was gone long before today. She wasn't weak. She was grieving, and there is a profound strength in having a heart that can still break for people who don't deserve it. I walked over and wrapped my arms around her from behind, pulling her close. She leaned into me, burying her face in my chest, letting out a long, shaky breath. We stood there for a long time, watching the snow fall over Chicago. The city looked clean, white, and new. "I'm sorry," she whispered into my shirt. "I'm sorry she came here." "Don't be," I said softly, kissing the top of her head. It was the best thing that could have happened. It reminded me of exactly what I have right here, and what I almost lost. That morning taught me a lesson I'll never forget. We spend so much time chasing people who don't value us, trying to prove our worth to them. But true worth isn't something you have to prove. It's seen instantly by the people who actually care. Vanessa chased the glitter and ended up with dust. I chased my purpose, and I ended up with a queen. Sometimes, the universe destroys your plans, so you don't destroy yourself trying to follow them. Losing everything was the most painful thing I ever went through, but it cleared the foundation for the life I was actually meant to live. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, looked at the string of desperate texts one last time, and hit block. Then, I turned the device off completely. The urgent talk was done. It was time to start living. 2 years have passed since I closed that door on Vanessa, and looking back, it feels less like a memory and more like a scene from a movie I once watched. I'm no longer in that cold, high-rise penthouse in downtown Chicago. I traded the steel and glass for something warmer. I'm sitting on the porch of a sprawling Victorian home in the quiet suburbs, wrapping my hands around a hot mug of coffee. The sun is filtering through the oak trees, casting dappled light across the lawn. In the yard, Chloe is laughing. She's chasing a golden retriever puppy. We named him Phoenix, and she looks radiant. We got married 6 months ago in a small, private ceremony in the backyard. There were no paparazzi, no influencers, and no drama. Just 50 of our closest friends, good food, and a whole lot of peace. My phone buzzes on the table next to me. It's a notification from Sentinel. We just closed another massive contract with a bank in London. Business isn't just booming, it's unstoppable. But unlike before, the money isn't the point. It's just a tool that allows me to sit here on a Tuesday morning and watch my wife smile. As for Vanessa, I don't check up on her, but this is a small town and word travels. A mutual friend mentioned she's working double shifts at a diner on the south side, trying to chip away at the mountain of debt Brad left in her name. She lives in a studio apartment now, much like the one I started in. Hearing that didn't make me happy. It didn't make me gloat. To be honest, I felt nothing. And that is the true victory. Anger is still connection. Hate is still an attachment. But indifference is freedom. Her chapter in my book isn't just closed. The pages have been torn out and thrown into the fire. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. I looked at Chloe, then down at the ring on my finger. I realized that losing everything, my money, my pride, my first marriage, was just the admission price for the life I actually wanted. The best revenge isn't ruining someone else. It isn't shouting your success from the rooftops so they can hear it. The best revenge is simply being perfectly, peacefully happy without them. And as I watched Chloe pick up the puppy and wave at me, I knew I had already won.